So as you guys can tell, it's not the greatest day today. So we're going to be doing a lot of work on the inside. We're going to be resecuring the locking mechanisms on both the doors. Change them from the wire type to more of a bar type. So it'll be a little more secure in here. We'll have a little more faith that our stuff won't necessarily come up missing and broken into. Right now, we don't really have much of worth the value in here, but hopefully that'll change soon. So just come along and see what we do. So our first goal at this point is to try and remove the old hardware that we're not going to use anymore, such as the T-handle in the middle, the knob if you will. And then we're going to have to get rid of the old spring wings, I guess. I don't really know what those are called. Because we're changing the entire style of how the door locks from this folding mechanism to a bar sliding mechanism. And I can explain more about that in a little bit. The first thing we have to do to get the old hardware off is work on pulling this push nut off. It's kind of intended to go on one time and be pushed on, and not really come off after that. So we gotta find a way to pry up each of these little tabs to slide it off in order to get the main mechanism off. All right, now that that's off, I'm just gonna slip that right off. There we go. All right, we're on the outside now. We gotta remove the handle from this side. It's gonna be a little bit fun because on one side we have a Phillips bit, no problem there. But on this side, we have a tamper resistant screw. It's the kind that the head is actually kind of ramped in the unscrew position. So it makes it more difficult to try and unscrew it. Luckily it's kind of loose though, so might be able to get with a flathead. And there we go. I think that was a little bit easier than I expected it to be when they put that in. That's why we're replacing stuff though. Next step we're gonna do is get rid of these spring-loaded wings. Like I said, I really don't know what I'm gonna call them, so I'm just gonna call them spring wings. And next we gotta work on getting this bracket off. To the other side. Next step. So at this point, all we gotta do is put the T-handle on from the outside, just slide it through. But we gotta put the facial plate on first. And that's just a couple of screws, so it ain't too hard. And then just slide it through. So it looks like the original hole is a little off angle. So it's gonna have a little bit of an angle to it. There's nothing I can really do about that, but it shouldn't bother us too bad with the end result. All right, so we went ahead and we marked out some markings because we're not using the lock that came with the kit. Cheaper lock, less secure, available on the internet. Lots of reasons to change that. The core of the lock that it uses to actually actuate the mechanism that lets us lock and unlock this door kit is a Schlage core. So we bought a Schlage lock to put on the outside. The core will still activate just fine, which is why we had to do the Schlage instead of like a quick set or something else. But we have to figure out where we want to drill our hole to match. The template we were given with the kit wouldn't work out the same. Probably gets close, but we're trying to go a little more precision accuracy. And I think that will actually work pretty good. A little bit of room to move it around if we have to center it up just right. The new lock versus the old intended style of lock has a different mounting pattern and different bolt layout. So the old one's a little bit narrower, the new one is a little bit wider. So I'm gonna try and waller out the holes a little bit wider and see if we can't get them to line up for us. All right, so we have the lock on the other side. We have the holes we've widened out. And we got the bolts. We're gonna put a couple of washers on. That way we have a little extra support. Due to the fact that the metal isn't as structurally sound as it once was, being widened out like that. And we really want to make sure that we're doing all this for a reason. I got this chunk of junk wood in here right now. I'm replacing it with something a little bit better looking a little bit, but that's just so the C-channel doesn't collapse on itself when we're doing this. So now we're going to put the lock body on. These just have sheet metal screws, and they kind of go in the corners up here. The holes are already pre-drilled, so it shouldn't be too problematic. Just gotta make sure we line up the core, and then it actually interacts with it once we have this on. Now, because we're combining a higher quality lock on the outside with a kit that we had on the inside, it's not going to sit 100% flush. But that's okay. And we can make it work. Let me know if this works. Did it work? Good. Well, we did kind of a dry fit mock-up here. Right now we have a nail instead of the roll pin that's going to eventually go in here, just kind of holding it together so it doesn't fall apart. And upon kind of putting it together to kind of see how it's going to fit, how it's going to work together, we found out that our bar isn't really quite long enough. And it's like this on both sides. So we have a couple of options. One is to get an extension kit. The other one is to drill out the rivet and replace the entire bar with a longer bar. And whatever we end up doing, we're going to do for all 4 bars, because there's 2 bars per door and 2 doors. So we're going to have to reconvene another day, because of course property owners always have to be 2 days for some reason. That's just the way they work. And we'll see y'all when we figure out what we're going to do and bring you back then. So it's been a little bit. We got a lot of work to do. So let's get to it. So as you just saw, we kind of ran into a little bit of a problem. This plate was attached to a couple of bars that were just a little too short for what we needed. So we cut them off. And we got some replacement bars get away. They're not exactly the same thing. The other bars were kind of sheet metal that were folded over to make this shape, but these are actually tension rods for chain link fence. They kind of go on the end and attach to like the main post and hold tension across the entire chain link evenly. They're really similar in shape and size, and they're solid metal, so I think it'll work pretty well, if not better than the original stuff. So we had to drill a hole, and we had to kind of deburr it so we don't cut ourselves on it. But we're going to attach that to this plate using some bolts and nuts and stuff, and we'll set it up and we'll mark out where it's at in the open position and the closed position, and we'll cut it as needed. So like I said, we cut the rivets off, so we're going to have to do some kind of replacement rivet. And while I could buy some rivets and replace them, I'd rather have something that's a little more replaceable, easier to work on. So we're just going to get a couple of nuts and bolts that are right about the right size. And that's going to be basically a replaceable stud to replace the rivet we had on there before. We'll use our tensioner post to fit on the nut, or the bolt, and we'll put a nut on to cover it, cap it off. And that will effectively do the same thing. It's not perfect, but in the theme of fabric cobbling everything that we've done so far, I think it matches. So this is the final result. I'll go over the exact composition of what nuts and bolts I have in what order in a little bit, but right now this leaves a nylock washer, or a nylock nut on the end, and I did that so it's not sharp. There's no threads to kind of cut your finger on or something by accident. As you can see, it definitely does what it's supposed to. Pivots just fine. I think it'll work. So now we can use this to retract it, and we can mark what our limit is there, extend it, and mark our limit there to make sure that we get it far enough that it still locks, but not too far that we can't open the door necessarily. All right, so right here you have the bolt that goes through the plate Then we have two nuts that are locking against each other so they don't move. The first one against the plate is pretty much tight, solid against the plate. And the other one's just backing it up so it doesn't come off. Then there's a little bit of play with the bar itself. And then there's another nut that's locking against the nylock nut. The nylock nut is primarily there just to round out the edges, like I said earlier. And the one behind that's just to make sure that it doesn't move or come loose over time. The garage door kind of vibrates quite a bit as it goes up and down, as you can imagine. So having these locked against each other should mitigate any kind of wiggling free over the years. All right, so we took some of the nuts and bolts back off so we could round out the edges and kind of fix that edge where it was a little straight and sharp. Kind of just rounded off like the other ones were, the original bars that were too short. And we noticed while doing that they actually have a second hole, so we can put a spring on here. So the spring goes and attaches right in this lower corner. And what that does is while the door is opening and closing, it keeps just a little bit of tension on it so it doesn't latch or close on the way up or down. And so now we make a big mess. But as you saw, it pulls it open. We still gotta put the end pieces on, that's why everything fell. But we'll get those in just a second. So speaking of making messes in the little end pieces, we'll go ahead and put one on now and line everything up and see where we go from there. Now with this one, we're able to hit an existing hole. This one, we're gonna have to create our own. We'll make sure that this doesn't hold too high, that the hole doesn't work, and that we don't have too much slop that you can reach your hand at the door or something. So I kind of like this, gives us a little bit of room, but not too much. Nice and solid. And now, whenever we twist the door handle, it should stay nice and clear. Now we just gotta do it 3 more times. As these property rentals go on, it seems like each one, for some reason or another, always takes longer than the last one. So, as you can see, it's a little dark outside. That means that one's gonna have to wait for another day. But for you guys, that should be right about now. We never really intended for this to be a step-by-step tutorial. Mostly because that would imply we know exactly what we're doing. In reality, we don't. We're kind of just going along and seeing where we have to go to do what we have to do. We don't really know where we're gonna end up, because we don't even know really where we're gonna start. But sooner or later, you have to start. And this whole project started in my head the moment I was shown how to open the doors to access the building. You see, we were never really given keys to the property, because there weren't exactly keys to be had. They mostly just bumped the door to open it, and that was not secure enough. Not for me. So while this isn't the most elegant of solutions, and I probably wouldn't even recommend it, it's practical, and it works. And for us, that makes it perfect.
I'm staying strong, need to move on to be what I want. I'll keep dreaming on. I'm staying strong, need to move on.